We'll start by removing the seat. We want to disconnect the battery negative cable. This is a 10 millimeter or a number 3 Phillips head screwdriver. Next, what we need to do is remove this plug. There's a little clip in the back here. You just need to push it down, and it'll slide right off of there. And then pull up on that tab. And separate those two. We need to get that out of the way. These are going to break, so you might as well just get rid of them. Using your T30, start by loosening these screws. So with these screws, you don't want to remove them all completely until we have them all nice and loose. And then you need to support the fender, and we can start taking them out. All right, now that we got it unplugged and the screws are all out, your fender should pop right down. If you happen to remove these bolts or the top hat spacers and you're not sure where they go, then you just want to remember that there's longer ones and shorter ones. The longer top hat spacer goes to the front. The shorter one goes to the back. The screws are almost the same length, but the slightly shorter one goes in the back and the longer one goes in the front. These should be the same, right to left. The shorter one, shorter one. Now we need to remove the inner fender. The T20, we got 3 screws right here that we need to remove. We want to unplug our lighting. These just pull apart. Push down on that one and pull. Now we need to remove these 2 bolts. It's an 8 millimeter socket. Now we need to guide these wires through this hole here. And where these 2 bolts were, there was a top hat spacer. If they didn't come out with the bolt, you want to grab it now so you don't lose it. You can set this fender aside for now. Now we need to mark our fender and cut it. You want to cut after these 2 holes right here. So you could disassemble all this stuff and get in there and cut it from that side. What I like to do is I just stick this through here, and now I know where I'm cutting on this side. So I'm going to make my mark right here. And the same thing on this side. That's where that hole is. And mark right there. Now I can put a straight line. Those 2 marks. So if you don't have one of these power tools, you can cut this with a hacksaw. I would use a more coarse thread, a coarse tooth hacksaw. Also a Dremel has plastic cutting blades that you could use also. This is a good tool to have in your garage. It's not very expensive and get a lot of use out of it. It's the Milwaukee Cut Off Tool. Now we need to cut a little V-notch in here because when we put this through the fender, we're going to have access to this nut here. These two go through here, and then to have access, we just need to put a relief there. Okay, now you might be wondering why you got to go through all this extra work. Why don't you just leave this off and bolt this directly to the fender? But in our testing, we found that this was a little bit heavy with the vibrations and ends up snapping off after a while. So when you put this on there, nothing moves and this stays nice and solid and you don't have to worry about it. All right, now from this side, we can just push these out with a screwdriver. Pull this straight through. We want to undo this one screw here. It's an 8mm socket. Pull these wires through. Prior to installing the taillight on the license plate assembly, we need to disassemble the frame and put our license plate in there and put our turn signal brackets on. Because otherwise, once you put that taillight on, you will not be able to take this cover off. So you need to do this first. So we'll start with our 10mm socket. Take off these 4 nuts. There's a flat washer and a lock washer also. It's easier to just lift that off and then we can get our washers off. And this is where you would want to install your license plate. We're not going to install one because we don't have one today. I'm just going to lift this up. Before you put your plate on, you want to put on your turn signal brackets. You want to have this piece towards the top. This is the top where the taillight goes, and going to the back. Now we could put your license plate on. Put the frame back on. So now we want to put our turn signals on. There's a left one and a right one. You want the screw to be at the bottom. And this is just for aesthetics. It's going to look better that way. So this one here would be our left, no screw on top. Or actually, that would be our right. It's in my left. Start by taking the nut and the lock washer off. Get rid of these ones. You just turn that. That screw will come out. You want to run your wires through one at a time. Through the round hole. So now you have this shoulder that should go into the hole. Once that's in there, you can put your screw back in. Get your lock washer, your nut, your 4mm Allen, your 10mm wrench. You can now tighten this. These are adjustable. They'll move up and down. You can reset them once they're on the bike to where you like them. I just try to set them so that this part is flush with itself. Now we'll repeat the same for the other side. Start by taking the nut and the lock washer off. Give that a twist. Pull that out. Put your wires through the hole. They could be a little tight when you're first pushing that through, and then it loosens up. The shoulder, make sure it's going into the hole. You screw in. Lock washer. Your 4mm Allen, 10mm wrench. Try and set them so both sides are the same. Now we can install the taillight. When you get your taillight assembly, there's going to be 2 screws in here with the nut on the back. They should only be finger tight. If they aren't, use a Phillips head screwdriver to take it out and discard those. With your 3mm Allen wrench, I'm going to take these screws, and there's a washer. You don't want to lose that. So now we can pull the taillight into the assembly. You have this window here that's clear, that's to illuminate your license plate. You need to line that up with that window there. And line up the 2 holes so that you can see through them. Now we can pull it in here. You want to make sure your window is facing your license plate. Line up the holes there. You see this groove here and that relief there. The groove is for the wires to go through, and the relief should make its way around the plate so that you don't have any gap here. If you have a gap there, do not tighten down your screws until you've got it flush. So now we can put the screws with our lock washer on. Use your 3mm Allen. Just start that one finger tight. one. Before you tighten anything down, make sure everything is all in line. No big gap there. Now we can tighten it down. And you got to remember you're tightening down onto this plastic lens, so you don't want to crank it down to where you break the lens. So just a little snug, hand tight is good. Now that we have the license plate assembly with the lights on in place, we want to mark our left turn signal, or your right. You can mark whichever one you want, but you can mark both of them. I like to take the left one, put a red piece of tape, so that when I pull it through the fender, I know which one is which. Now that that's done, I take the 3 spacers and put them on these studs. So when we go on to the fender with this, we want to have our turn signal wires routed right through here. And the reason for this, instead of routing them up top here and putting all these together, is that there's these 2 protrusions coming off the fender here that are going to pinch those wires when you tighten it down. So if we have them under here, they won't get pinched. The other thing you want to keep an eye out for is to make sure you don't get these caught in between the spacers as you tighten everything down. So as you tighten it down, make sure your wires are loose and not getting pinched on anything. So now we can put our wires through the fender. We've got this big hole here. And what we want to do here is our turn signal wires, we want coming underneath these 2 studs. Make sure everything can move and it's not getting pinched. So now we want to throw a nut onto this 1 stud. We're going to put the washer, put a nut, a 10mm socket. Just going to snug it up for now so that it holds everything in place. Next, we want to plug in our extension to our taillight. And these only go on one way. So if it's not going, don't force it. Make sure it locks in place. I'm going to slide our heat shrink tube over it. Shrink it down with the heat gun. You could use a lighter if you don't have a heat gun, but heat gun is definitely preferred. And we can run our wires through this opening here. Now we're ready to put the inner fender on. You want to make sure all your wire is going right down the middle and staying in line here, and that this stays here. If it's off to the side, these raised pieces will pinch it. So you want to make sure that that's all staying centered. Everything lays nice and flat. And this is why we cut that piece out, so now we can access that nut. When you're installing a top hat spacer, the shoulder there goes into the plastic so that your wider piece is on top and the smaller, narrower piece fits into the plastic. The 2 washers, 2 nuts. The 10mm socket. Snug it up a little bit. Don't go too tight because we need to line everything up straight before we final tighten everything. Make sure our wires nice down the center. And we want to make sure that this is straight. Now we can make it all hand tight. And just take a look at it. Make sure you're happy with it. This seems like it come down a little bit on one side, so we can loosen it up just a little bit. And that looks good. Just go a little bit overhand tight, and you're good to go. So if you happen to remove these screws before and now you're going to put them back in, they're 2 different lengths. So you want to make sure you put them in the right spot. The longer one, which is only slightly longer, goes to the front. The shorter ones go to the back. Also, you want to make sure that your top hat spacers are in place. And with these, the same thing. The longer one is in the front, and the shorter one is in the back. The longer side goes down. I'll bring our fender in, make sure our wires are lined up with the relief here and that they're all through here and not folded underneath. Pull out one screw, line it up. Just start threading it in, don't tighten it. We want to line up the holes up front, and you have to push up on the inner fender portion a little bit to get that to line up. Then with your T30 Torx bit, just tighten it, don't make it hand tight, you just want to get the screws started. And once we have them all started, then we can go and start tightening them up. Make sure our wires are lined up here. Tighten these two back ones. And tighten them up until you feel it stop on the shoulder. That's the top hat spacer bottoming out. Now with our torque wrench, we want to tighten these down to 10 Newton meters using our T30 Torx bit. Now we want to slide our heat shrink tube over the brake light portion of the harness and plug it in. And we can slide that over and shrink it. So now we can plug the turn signals in. On the left side of our harness, it's marked with a red shrink tube. And that's why I marked this red, so that I know to just put those two together. I'm going to put black to black and the yellow to the white. The right side is marked with the green. I'm going to put the black to black and the yellow to the blue. I'm going to reconnect the battery, negative cable. Use a number 3 screwdriver or 10 millimeter socket. Tighten that up. Let me turn the key on. Check our left, that's working. Check our right, that's working. Check our brake light, that's working, we're good. Now we want to make sure that both our turn signals are at the same angle. The other thing is, if you wanted to raise this up or down, you want to do that now and make sure they're both the same. So this is the screw that we want to tighten. Once we have them both set even, using our 4 millimeter Allen bit, just tighten it down just enough to keep it from turning. Go over to the other side and do the same. So if you want to move this up to the top or in the middle, anywhere, you would want to do it with this light being loose. So you can get it out of the way there. And with your 4 millimeter Allen, 10 millimeter wrench. You want to loosen it with the Allen side so that you don't knock your fender with your wrench. Then you can bring it up. Tighten it down. And again with your 4 millimeter Allen, we're tighten the light. So now we want to raise this side to match. So loosen that using our 4mm, our 10mm wrench. Raise it up. With our 4mm Allen, tighten that down. Now we can install the seat. You want to make sure these two hooks go into here. This tongue here goes underneath the gas tank. Make sure your wiring is inside the fender. It's not going to get hooked in with these hooks at all. And that's our pan taillight with license plate mounted turn signals on this 2022 Triumph Street Twin.